On March 11, 1958, in the quiet rural community of Mars Bluff, South Carolina, the Gregg family's day was shattered by an earth-shaking explosion. Their home was obliterated. Their yard was turned into a 70-foot-wide crater. The cause wasn't a gas leak or a meteorite. It was a 7,600-pound Mark VI nuclear bomb dropped on them by the United States Air Force. This wasn't an act of war. It was an accident. How does a nuclear weapon, one of the most guarded devices on Earth, simply fall out of a plane and detonate in an American family's backyard? To understand how, you have to go back to the height of the Cold War. This was the era of the Strategic Air Command, or SAC, America's nuclear sword and shield. Its bombers were on constant alert, practicing for a war they hoped would never come. One such mission was Operation Snow Flurry, a simulated nuclear strike on Europe. At Hunter Air Force Base in Savannah, Georgia, the four-man crew of a B-47 Stratojet, serial number 531876A, prepared for their flight. In its belly, the bomber carried a single Mark VI atomic bomb. This is the minute-by-minute story of that flight. It's the forgotten true story of the Mars Bluff broken arrow, an account of how a single faulty pin in a moment of panic led to an American town being bombed by its own military, and how a crucial missing component was the only thing that stood between a terrifying accident and a full-blown nuclear catastrophe. The crew was a team of seasoned airmen. In command was 36-year-old Captain Earl Kohler, the pilot. Alongside him were co-pilot Captain Charles Woodruff, navigator and bombardier Captain Bruce Kulka, and Crew Chief Sergeant Robert Skreptok. Their cargo, the Mark VI, was a direct descendant of the Fat Man bomb dropped on Nagasaki. It was designed to be delivered with precision and secured by a system of safeties. The final and most important of these was a simple, heavy steel locking pin. When the pin was inserted into the bomb's shackle, it was physically impossible to release the weapon. But per regulations for a quick jettison in a takeoff emergency, the pin was to be pulled before flight and reinserted once safely in the air. This tiny detail would prove catastrophic. Even before takeoff, the ground crew had trouble seating the pin, a frustrating sign of what was to come. At 3:53 p.m., Captain Kohler's B-47 lifted off the runway and began its climb. About 5 minutes into the flight, as the plane climbed through 5,000 feet, co-pilot Woodruff followed procedure and attempted to re-engage the locking pin, but it wouldn't seat properly. In the cockpit, a warning light glared back at him, signaling that the most powerful weapon in the world hanging beneath them was not fully secured. They tried again, climbing to 15,000 feet. Still, the light remained on. The pin would not latch. A minor mechanical nuisance had just escalated into a serious in-flight emergency. Captain Kohler had a choice: abort the mission and return to base with an unsecured nuclear weapon, or fix it in the air. He chose to fix it. He ordered the bombardier, Captain Bruce Kulka, to go into the bomb bay and manually seat the pin. This was no simple task. The bomb bay was unpressurized and unheated. At 15,000 feet, the air was thin and freezing. Kulka, encumbered by his flight suit and oxygen mask, had to navigate a narrow catwalk around the massive 7,600-pound bomb. For 12 agonizing minutes, Captain Kulka struggled in the cramped, frigid darkness. He couldn't see the pin, let alone force it into place. The aircraft was climbing, the angle steepening. Searching for a handhold to steady himself, he reached up and grabbed the nearest solid object he could find. It was the bomb's emergency release lever. In an instant, the shackle holding the Mark VI sprang open. Kulka watched in horror as the nuclear bomb detached and fell onto the closed bomb bay doors below him. The weight of the bomb was immense. It smashed through the thin aluminum doors, ripping them from their hinges and plummeting toward the earth. Kulka himself was nearly sucked out of the gaping hole in the fuselage. He clung on for his life as the wind screamed past. Below, somewhere in the South Carolina landscape, a nuclear weapon was now in a terminal dive, falling from 3 miles high. On the ground in Mars Bluff, life was proceeding as normal. Walter Gregg, a 37-year-old World War II veteran, was working in his garage. His wife Effie was inside the house. Their 3 young children, aged 6, 8, and 9, and their 11-year-old niece, Ella Davies, were playing in the yard. They heard a whistling sound, then a deafening roar. The bomb slammed into the soft soil of their garden, just 100 yards from the house. The conventional high explosives inside, the trigger for the nuclear reaction, detonated with the force of several tons of TNT. The Gregg's home and garage were ripped apart. The children's playhouse vanished into splinters. The blast carved a crater 70 feet wide and 35 feet deep. Miraculously, no one was killed, but all 6 people on the property were injured by flying debris. Walter Gregg suffered deep cuts to his arm. His wife Effie was hit by falling plaster. The children were peppered with shards of wood and glass. 11-year-old Ella Davies required surgery for internal injuries. They were alive, but their world had been utterly destroyed. High above, the B-47 was rocked by the shockwave. Captain Kohler immediately circled the site, his crew taking photographs of the pillar of smoke for their report. Their coded radio calls to Hunter Air Force Base went unanswered. The ground crew didn't recognize the alarm code. In a moment of understated panic, Kohler contacted the civilian air traffic control tower in Florence, South Carolina, with a chilling message. Aircraft 53-1876A has lost a device. Within minutes, the site was a scene of controlled chaos. Local emergency services rushed in. The Civil Air Patrol set up roadblocks. Soon, Air Force military police arrived and sealed off the entire area. Ordnance teams began the painstaking process of combing the crater for bomb fragments, while civilians who had pocketed shiny pieces of shrapnel as souvenirs were told to hand them over. Technicians with Geiger counters swept the blast zone. The readings came back at or near normal background levels. The world's worst fears were not realized. The reason for the lack of radiation was a critical, life-saving piece of protocol. For transport and training flights, the bomb's plutonium nuclear core, the fissile material necessary for a nuclear chain reaction, was removed. It was flown separately in a secured container nicknamed the birdcage. The bomb that fell on Mars Bluff was, in nuclear terms, unarmed. Had that capsule been inside, the high explosive detonation could have triggered a full-scale nuclear blast, wiping Mars Bluff off the map and sending a radioactive cloud across the eastern seaboard. The safety procedure had worked, but everything else had failed. When Captain Kohler's crew landed back at Hunter, they were met by armed guards, disarmed, and taken for interrogation. The head of SAC, the formidable General Curtis LeMay, became personally involved, but the investigation quickly revealed a cascade of human error and procedural lapses, not sabotage. The crew was cleared. In Washington, the Air Force moved to control the story, reassuring a terrified public that a nuclear explosion was never possible. For the Gregg family, the Air Force eventually settled their lawsuit for $54,000. Walter Gregg, with a touch of gallows humor, later quipped, "I always wanted a swimming pool, and now I've got the hole for one." Today, the scar on the landscape remains. The crater in Mars Bluff is still there, now a quiet, wooded pond on private land. A historical marker stands nearby, telling the improbable story to passers-by. It's a quiet monument to a day when the Cold War came home, a reminder of a broken arrow, the military code for a nuclear weapon accident that doesn't create a nuclear detonation. The story of Mars Bluff is a testament to the terrifyingly thin line between routine and catastrophe, and to the sheer, dumb luck that ensured a devastating accident didn't become an unthinkable tragedy.